What is the Eucharistic Congress?
So the National Eucharistic Congress um, is actually a corporation. It's like it was made into like a, yeah, like an official business, I think. An organization to organize and make a Eucharistic Congress for the United States of America. So any country anywhere can have a Eucharistic Congress, and anybody anywhere can have a Congress. So Congress is just a bringing together of people. I think it literally means to like walk together or something like that. So the United States of America is founded on a by a Congress. The guys came together and they made this Constitution or whatever. So a Eucharistic Congress is where people come together to make a constitution or make commitments or whatever based around the Eucharist. So we you pray a lot in front of the Eucharist. You just say mass. You do a lot of adoration. You really just gather your group, whether it's a country or whatever, and you gather around the Eucharist to just chart a course for yourself and chart a course as a group of people. So we did that in the U.S. We've done it multiple times in the U.S., but the last one was about 80 or so years ago, and now in 2024 we did one in Indianapolis.
So, why is the Eucharist important?
There's a lot of ways to answer that. Okay, the simplest one is the Eucharist is literally Jesus. So that's kind of the end of the story because it's literally Jesus. It's not in any way different except the way he looks, but he has chosen to come to us in that way so he could stay with us and be with every human being throughout the world at the same time in a physical way, and in a beautiful way, and in the form of bread and wine so that we could have a symbol but also a real way of having the deepest union with Jesus possible to not only mingle in our spirits but also our bodies with Jesus. So that's why he chose to come in that form. But yeah, the first reason it's so important is because it's literally Jesus. Um, the second reason is you could go by the teachings of the church, which says that because it is Jesus, it's the source and summit of our faith. Everything of our faith should lead to the Eucharist, and everything of our faith should come from the Eucharist. So the Mass is the center of every Christian's life. So um, that's another way that you could look at it.
So, should we have a special devotion to the Eucharist?
Yes, and I'll qualify that by saying that sometimes you say we have a devotion to Mary, we have a devotion to the Rosary, or a devotion to a saint, or a devotion to a certain prayer. So having a devotion to the Eucharist is not a devotion; it is above all other things. All those other things should lead us to the Eucharist. So it's not a devotion; it's the devotion, because devotion means love. The thing that you do to make you love something is an expression of your love. So the Eucharist is in a category way of its own because it's Jesus Himself. So um, a devotion to the Holy Face, for instance, you're devoted to an aspect of Jesus, His face, or the Rosary, a part of Jesus' life, which is the Virgin Mary, a part of my life as well. And it helps me to think about Jesus. But the Eucharist is Jesus, so that's above and beyond. That's the whole person. That's Him. So that's why it's above every other devotion. It's not a devotion. It's the thing to which all love points to, because it's Him.
So, when people say, I don't have to go to church because I can talk to Jesus right here, right now, why do we have to go to church?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's true. You can talk to God anywhere, but I would say if someone's thinks it's really important to talk to Jesus, then they probably care about what He says. One of the things that He said extremely clearly is that we should celebrate the Eucharist together. So He said that. So if someone really cares about what Jesus says, then they should care that He said we have to celebrate the Eucharist together, not alone. And you can't celebrate the Eucharist alone. We always do it together. Furthermore, he told the apostles that they will speak in his name, and what they bind on earth will be bound in heaven. What they loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. And he told the apostles, whoever hears you, hears me. So the church, founded on the apostles and has succeeded the apostles, all the bishops are successors of the apostles. So when they speak, we're hearing the apostles still, which means we're hearing Jesus. No one can read your mind, not even the good angels or the saints. Only God knows our thoughts. So God can, but nobody else is able to, especially the devil. And that's important to know. He can't read your thoughts.
Can he put bad thoughts in your mind?
In one sense, yes. So the devil is essentially like social media, especially now with like AI. So they can read your mind only in the sense that it's a very intelligent system, quote unquote intelligent. It's artificial intelligence, but it's a really smart computer program. But the devil is that by a lot more multiplications. So he can't read your mind, but he is smart enough, and he's been studying you long enough. He knows what you're probably thinking, and he knows what you like to do or you don't like to do. And he's also been tempting humans for our entire existence. So he knows, just generally, like he knows good strategies. Oh, this will work, this won't work. So yeah, he's like the ultimate artificial intelligence trying to get us that way. And same thing with let's continue with like the AI comparison with social media. You know how you get those social media ads or stuff where you're like, are they reading my mind? Like, how did this just pop up? Well, it's because they're smart and they know what would work for you. And the devil does the same thing. He'll pop up images in front of you in your mind. It's not putting it in your mind, but he will put a thought or like an image. That's what we call the power of our imagination. That's the ability to put an image in front of your mind. So we can put images in front of our own mind. We can do it ourselves. If I tell you to think about something, I'm putting an image into your mind. The devil can also insinuate images into our minds. And then it's up to us what we're going to do with those images.
So, what is the best way to prevent the enemy's attacks on you?
We mentioned the saints, so wearing medals and praying to the saints. But the number one best way, absolutely essential way, that if you don't have this, it doesn't matter what else you do, is to be in the state of grace, which well, that could be complicated for people, but basically what it means is that you're in friendship with God and you're not aware of any serious way that you're not following God.
So, to be in grace, do you have to go to confession?
Technically, no, because your state of good relationship, your state of grace means that you're being gracious to somebody. So when you're baptized, you're put in that good relationship with God. Now, if you never sinned after baptism, you'll always be in the state of grace. Some people have lived that way, where they've never committed a really serious sin, or they've never turned their back on God. And so they've lived their whole life where they wouldn't have really had to go to confession to renew their grace. Most people do, though. So then confession is that way where Jesus has set up, knowing that many of us would turn our back on him with serious like faults, serious sins. And so that's his way of saying, I know that you're going to do that, but I also want to give you a way that you can know you can always come back. I will always give you my grace, my good relationship. So confession is the way to restore that good relationship. But you were talking about being protected. It's the state of grace that is the key. So if you're in a good relationship with the Lord, the devil can still hit you with those things, but if you're outside of that relationship with God, he will absolutely destroy your life. And you'll have no way of stopping him.
So, if someone has been away from God for a long time, or maybe never even knew God, how can they become closer to God today?
Say that was the phrase you said. They didn't never knew God. God told us that when you look for me with your whole heart, you will find me. So that's the way that someone can get closer to God today, just to say, even if it's not a prayer, like if you don't think God exists, you could just make it kind of a prayer in your mind and say, I really want to know who God is, and I want to look for him with my whole heart, like very sincerely. I want to know what's the right thing. I want to know what the truth is. And at the end of the day, God is truth. God is goodness. God is the right thing. So when you're looking for those things, you'll find eventually that it's God that you're looking for. So that's how somebody can make a good first step, is just to sincerely say, this is what I want to do with my life. If you're willing to pray, that will expedite the process. So if you want to say a prayer and say, God, I don't know really who you are, but I believe that you're there somehow. So I'm praying to you to please show yourself to me and help me. Then that person will get an answer somehow.
So, what is praying? What does praying mean?
Praying literally means just to talk to God. Yeah, to talk to God. That's the simple answer.
So, is it true that one confession is stronger than 100 exorcisms?
Um, it's maybe a nice turn of phrase. I don't know if that's literally true, because it's hard to quantify like 100, and you know what I mean. So, but it is true that in if someone's possessed and you're trying to exorcise the evil spirit out of them, get the evil spirit out of them, confession is the most powerful thing. Because again, what you're doing, we were talking before about relationship. Confession is telling the devil, I don't want anything to do with you or that evil spirit. I don't want to be in a relationship with you. So in confession, it's rejecting him and turning to God for help. And once that process has begun, once somebody sincerely does that, then God's graces will eventually get rid of that demon or demons for sure. So confession is always the critical thing with exorcisms.
Why do Catholics get baptized as babies and not older?
Hmm. Well, that's a trick question, isn't it? So you're here to try to trick me.
Little
So
bit.
so we do both. We baptize people as babies, as you know, any age up to adults. We tend to do it as children, and we prefer that. Um,
Is there a reason why we start with children being
yeah, there's
baptized?
a bunch of reasons. The main one for us is always to follow what Jesus said and did. Um, there was one saying of his which was, "Let the children come to me." So, and the apostles were um, kind of trying to prevent the kids from coming up to Jesus, because that was a little bit revolutionary at the time, to have kids interact with a person like Jesus, like a grown man, a very famous teacher, stuff like that. Um, that wasn't really the place of kids in that culture, to interact that way. And Jesus said, "No, let the kids come to me." So we as Christians have, that's one of the ways we've interpreted it, is for baptism as well. And it makes sense, because if it is a grace to be in a good relationship with God, it's not something you earn. So there's nobody who can earn anything less than a baby. God is just giving them new life, just like parents are just giving that baby life in the first place. So, you could say, the kids, the analogy is funny if you think about it that way. If you're saying you should only be baptized as an adult, it's like, well, should we be born as adults too? Like we should choose to be alive? It's like, no, it's something that's given to you. So is baptism. That's eternal life. It's just given to you. And then lastly, we do also see in the Acts of the Apostles, which record the early Christian actions, how did the early church do things? We do see verses where it talks about whole households or whole families were coming into the church, so that it doesn't, and they don't use the word kids, but a whole household, you assume, has kids in it. So we see there that young and old have always been brought into the church. Yeah.
Okay. So, why are we Catholic if Jesus was Jewish?
Because uh, we consider ourselves in a way, for the fulfillment of Judaism. So we kind of see it as like a continual line, because the one thing the Jews were always looking for was the Messiah. We think Jesus is the Messiah. And so it's really a connection. And so what Jesus then did was bring to fulfillment and completion the Jewish faith. He said, I've not come to abolish, but to fulfill. So he brought what the Jewish people were doing, what they were taught by God, and he brought it to the highest possible level and the most complete fulfillment. Um, Most of all, and primarily at the Last Supper. The Last Supper is when Jesus took the old covenant. Well, there were several covenants actually. God was always making new covenants with the Jewish people. And then at the Last Supper, he said, "This is the new covenant that God is making with you." But he also did something which it never was called before. He said, "This is the new and everlasting covenant." The covenant, so there won't have to be any more. And why is that the case? Because in the old covenants, a covenant was that making a public relationship with God to say, "You're our God, we are your people. Um, you'll be good to us, we'll be good to you." The problem was we could never be good or live up to the law in God's eyes. So he always had to give us new chances, make new covenants. Well, with Jesus, as we said before, he's both God and man. So he keeps both ends of the covenant. So that's why there doesn't have to be a new one. He's completed every possible plan by every time that any human could sin and break the covenant. Well, our soul is separated from our body. That's what death is. So your soul immediately goes in front of God, and you talk to God um, about your whole life. And some people say it's like watching a movie, but I'm sure it's something like watching a movie where it's just like it would be a long movie, but you understand everything what's happening completely clearly, and God just shows you what it was, and you won't be able to argue about it because you'll just see like, well, that's what it was, and then at that moment you'll see and you'll know, and you will choose to go to the place where you deserve to go to, which is either hell, purgatory, or heaven. The really two choices are only hell or heaven, either good or evil. But heaven being so good and so pure, sometimes on your way up to heaven, for most of us, this is the case on your way to heaven, even though we've chosen the way of good to follow God, um, we may have not chosen it as well as we could have, should have, or paid for the sins that we committed along the way. So, out of justice, even we ourselves would agree after we die, we would say, "Thanks for letting me in, but I really, there's some things need to be paid for." And so that's what purgatory is. Jesus described it as being put in jail for a time, and you don't get out until you pay the last penny. St. Paul described it as going through a fire where everything that's not worthy of heaven gets burned away. And St. Paul says you'll experience a loss as those things get burned away. Things that you wasted your time on, things that are not going to be worthwhile to you in heaven that you wasted your time on earth gathering up or focusing on. So he described it as like wood or straw, stuff that's flammable. And the only thing that gets through is the gold and silver, which doesn't get burned up in fire. And gold represents your love of God, and silver represents your love of your neighbor. Those are the only things that get into heaven, the only things that count. Anything else you did that wasn't for those two reasons are going to be a loss and a waste for you.
Do you suffer in purgatory?
You ever put your hand in a fire? Yeah, so it apparently is quite painful. So the way that you experience the fire of putting your hand in a fire or something or getting burned, it is comparable to that apparently, because that's how St. Paul described it. So, or being in jail. If anybody's ever been in jail, it's quite a painful experience. Um, I've had the chance to work in jails a couple of times, and you see there's real pain there, but also it's a place where you have a lot of conversions, a place where people really take stock of themselves, people where they can make atonement or make amends for their sins. That's what jail is for. So so purgatory is like that. So it's a painful place, but at the same time, it's a good place. It's a good thing. And you're unhappy, but you're also happy, and even more so in purgatory because you know that you are going to heaven, and that gives you ultimate joy. So it is a place of joy and a place of happiness, more so than on earth, but also a place more painful than on earth. So it's both. We don't exactly know how that works because we're talking purely spiritual. Remember, at this point in purgatory, you don't have your body. So I think that's what makes things more poignant in a good way and in a bad way. Because on earth, we experience everything in our soul through our body. But there, we don't have the body to be like a barrier. So it just goes straight to your soul. So it just makes it more everything. May 13th was the first time in 1917 that Our Lady appeared as Our Lady of Fatima. May 13th, 1917. And then, famously, for the next couple months, she always appeared on a certain day of the month. May 13th, and then June 13th, July 13th, all the way to October 13th of that year. So the 13th of those months has always been special for Catholics as being in remembrance of Our Lady, especially Our Lady of Fatima. Our Lady of Fatima appeared specifically to fight communism and atheistic ideals that come from communism. That's why she appeared on the 13th of each month that year, and then subsequently to Sister Lucia. It was very specifically, now she did that in different ways by consecration of Russia to her Immaculate Heart, that we should be devoted to her Immaculate Heart by practicing the first 5 Saturday devotion and by praying the Rosary every day. And most of all, for turning back to Jesus from our own sins and praying for those who are caught in sin so that they might not go to hell. That's what we call the devotion to the Immaculate Heart of Mary. So that devotion that she gave us at Fatima was specifically to fight communism. Okay, we know that communism has come back into the world, maybe stronger than it ever was before. We know that Trump has done things that are against communism, not the least of which is to try to promote religious liberty and things like that. When you see Trump fighting those communist things, it would make sense that Our Lady, who her big thing is to fight atheistic communism, she's going to help people who are helping her fight communism. So, what day did Trump get shot on? The 13th of July. So for us, our ears as Catholics immediately go up and we're like, Fatima, she's fighting communism. So maybe she is thinking, I can use this guy to keep fighting against communism and its ideals and its practices. So that to me seems pretty clear. Okay.
So why does the devil fear Mary so much?
Because God has always ordained it that she would always have the upper hand on him, or I should say the upper heel. In the beginning of the Bible, God said that the woman would crush the serpent's head. And so ever since then, that's what she's been doing. She crushes his head wherever we ask her to. So the reason she can do that is because she never sinned, and no sin ever touched her. And so the only way that the devil has hold over us is through sin. So she literally has complete domination over him, and he can never have any power over her. Now, you could say, well, the devil has no power over God either. That's true. But God has ordained it that this young human woman would, who would seemingly have no power over the devil, he's much more of a powerful creature by nature than a human is. So it's particularly humiliating to him that he's always outdone by this human. So that's why God has ordained it to do it that way, because it's actually more painful, more humiliating to the devil to be beaten by her. So that's God's plan. Well, I get this question a lot. People will usually put it in a more like aggressive tone. They're like, "Why do you worship Mary?" Or "Why do you worship the saints?" Or something like that. Which the answer to that is we don't. We only worship God. So we worship God, but we do honor Mary, we venerate Mary, we venerate her because she's the greatest of all the saints. So we put her on top of all the saints in a category of her own. And we would say we don't worship them, but we pray to them and we honor them. And the way that I usually put it is like this. If, especially to like a Protestant Christian, because they're the ones who usually would ask that question, because they're usually the ones that have the understanding that we worship the saints or worship Mary or something. So they understand praying for each other. So I'll say to the Protestant Christian, well, what if I asked you to pray for me? And they would say, sure, I would do that. And I would say, I would believe that your prayers, because you're a believer, will be heard by God, and God will help me because of your prayers. How much more so a Christian who dies and is in heaven already, I believe that they can still hear me, they can see me, and I can still ask them to pray for me. So I'm asking Mary, who's closer to God than I am by far, to pray for me. That's what we do. We're saying, could you please pray for me? And then they do. And because of those prayers, they get help, just like we do for each other on earth. We pray for each other. And as far as like, then usually you get into, well, why do you have the statues and the pictures and whatnot of the saints? Like, do you worship them? And my answer to that is similar. It's like, no, let's imagine we're family members and you have pictures in your home of people that you love. It just reminds you of that they're real people, but you don't think that the picture is that person. But it can be a good reminder that they are real, that they're still around, that you still love them. And in our case, we have the statues or the paintings because it helps us to focus our mind and remember that they're still alive, that they're still real people that we can talk to, even though we don't see them anymore. Yeah.
So Catholics do have a lot of medals that they wear for protection. How can a medal protect you from evil?
I guess the first way is if somebody shot a bullet at you and the metal caught, that would save you. So that's protection in like a physical sense, which does happen. I've seen things of like either a medal or sometimes like a pocket Bible or something and it stops a bullet. But I don't think that's what you're talking about. Um, Protection in a spiritual sense too. Scripture talks about the fiery darts or the fiery arrows of the devil. So he's prowling like a roaring lion, uh, who's always trying to attack us in any way that he can. Just like a lion would do physically, the devil is like the devil and his other fellow lions, the demons, fallen spirits. There are evil spirits who are always trying to attack us if they can, and they're always prowling around to do so. Um, so, where do the medals come in? The medals come in because they're basically just we were talking about with the saints, where a picture of the person will remind us to pray to that person. And the medal is almost a little more powerful in that sense because it's like a constant prayer. So I'm wearing a picture of a saint, and that's constantly asking that saint to pray for me. And so they will. So the devil shoots a fiery arrow at me, maybe unbeknownst to me, usually unbeknownst to me. And I'm already praying to that saint, and I'm saying, through all my life, throughout this day, please pray for me because I know that this is going to happen, and I need you to protect me. And that's what he does. It's like walking around this. If you're going to walk through the streets of the city, and you know it's going to be a little maybe tough neighborhood or whatever, you want to have somebody walking next to you. By wearing the medal, it's like asking that saint to walk next to me spiritually, and that's what they do.
Do you have any like last words, or is there anything that you want to say before we wrap up?
Well, there was another very famous person who was shot on the 13th of a month, John Paul II, on May 13th in the 1980s, and he was shot by communists because he was fighting communism, and Our Lady saved him as well. So much did he believe that he took the bullet that almost killed him, should have killed him, and he put it into the crown of Our Lady of Fatima. So when you go to Fatima, you can still see the bullet in her crown because he was giving her credit. He said one hand shot the bullet, another hand moved it, the hand of Mary. So I would like to make that connection to, I'd point people to Our Lady. In American politics or world politics, it's still the same. We're fighting against things that are anti-Christian, things that go against the teachings of Jesus. So it's not really a political battle, first and foremost. Um, we don't put our trust in princes, as it says in scriptures, and we don't go to the country. We don't go to Egypt because it has chariots and charioteers, as it says in the scriptures. Meaning, those we don't follow people because they have the biggest army or the most political influence. That's not what we're here to talk about. We're here to help and encourage the gospel and to make a situation where as many people as possible can freely choose to follow the gospel. That's what we're here to do.